welcome to the Drum Corps Coffee Shop. We are back. What's going on, George?
All I know is that it's really hot outside, and I'm starting to see videos of drum corps actually rehearsing. So it must be time, finally, after all of this time, to start talking about and getting to see the activity again.
It is not too late to hype. Definitely not. Yeah. So today, I'm a little short on words because I'm excited. We always talk about the heroes of our youth, and today we are lucky enough to have one of them. I don't know if you want to intro this, George, or...
I mean, sure. It's, today we have a true legend of the activity on both sides. Somebody that was massively influential in drum corps when you and I were coming up and while we were marching. And then also has had probably the biggest impact overall on the indoor percussion activity.
Oh, for sure.
So without further ado, we'd like to welcome Mr. Mark Thurston to the podcast. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to the shop.
Hi, Mark. Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the shop.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So, it's awesome to have you here. And, man, I don't know where to start because you've been there from like pretty much almost the beginning of the DCI. And now I know you've been there since the beginning of WGI. And now, you've helped guide the ship through the pandemic, and we are almost out on the other end. And so very much looking forward to talking about all of that. Mm-hmm. But first off, I know, you marched Crossmen, and back then they were from Pennsylvania. Is that where you grew up? Was it in the Pennsylvania area? Or where do you hail from?
Actually, I grew up in Utica, New York, which is right in the center of the state. So I'm an upstate boy.
Oh, okay.
So that's born and raised, family still up there.
Oh, no. Nice.
But you started, I looked up a little bit. You actually started drumming really young. Like you actually got involved in the activity, like even way before you marched Crossmen, correct?
Oh yeah. I was 7 years old, and one day I was out on my bike and I hear this snare drum. So I go running up the street, and about 3 houses up was a neighbor of mine in the backyard. He must have been 14 at the time, playing his snare drum. And I saw it and I said, I have to do that. So that's where it all started. It's just like a lot of us. We all have that thing that just really made us want to drum. And I saw that and I said, I have to do it. So I started taking private lessons from him, and he was in a local drum corps up in New York. And I immediately got involved in that, and that was it. I was a little tyke on the end of the line, just trying to hang.
So you were actually marching drum corps how old?
I was probably about 8 years old when I started.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you look at the threads, and you see people talk about the corps from back then. That it seemed like there was a lot of them. And us on the West Coast, we pretty much know the DCI stuff, but I know that there is a whole bunch of the DCA stuff, and some of the names that stick out are like the Polish Knights. That sounds. I think I've seen that one before, and the Watkins Glen Squires is another one that I've heard of before, and I'm sure you could probably ramble off at least 20 more off the top of your head that were from back in that era.
There was a drum corps, it seemed like, in every town, because. And some had more than one. Like in Utica, we had the Royaliers, which was a group that I started with. And then there was the Magnificent Yankees, and they were pretty good. And they had a cadet corps, the Yankee Cadets, which I ended up going to after the Royaliers. So there was 3 drum corps right in Utica, and everybody was attached to a VFW post back then. So people would hang out at the post. They all had drum corps, and they were all small. Everybody was tiny. There was maybe 50 people in them, but it was great.
As you're growing and progressing, as a drummer, were there any drum lines or drum corps that stood out that were like your hero corps or hero drum lines that you kind of idolized?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody in the early 70s immediately identified with the Vanguard. I mean, I was one of those kids at the same thing. It was just, you saw the Vanguard, and it was, it was incredible. But I'll tell you that when I started growing up and I was playing in these small drum corps, I had an experience one time that really kind of changed my life. I was about 13 years old, and I had gotten to a show. It was in North Jersey, and the Hawthorne Muchachos were warming up. Okay, this is probably in 74-ish. And I remember running right out to stand in front of them to watch them play. And let me tell you, when they started to play, they made me feel so uncomfortable for standing in front of them that I was like a little kid, tail between my legs, and I ran away because they were staring at my forehead, and it freaked me out. They were so intense, and they were so good. So at the same time, I was so blown away to see something that good, but I was so intimidated that it was something that it stuck with me forever.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've seen video of the Muchachos from back then, and I've even seen, I want to say it was like a grainy semifinals clip from the famous or infamous '75 show. That whole story about them getting disqualified right before finals, and from what I understand, they were like the favorites to win everything, and they had a smoking drum line, but yeah, I mean, the stories from back then of those guys are just incredible.
The vibe was legendary for that time period, for sure.
Oh yeah, they were the real deal.
Yeah. So we talked to a few people. I know I reached out to a few people, but actually, honestly, one of the first things, I got to get this out before we even get started, and I hope you have a good sense of humor. When I told one of the admins of the coffee shop Facebook group that we're gonna have Mark Thurston on the podcast, the first thing he asked was, ask him if anybody's ever told him that he looks like Uncle Rico from the movie Napoleon Dynamite.
Yes, and I have had that before, the Uncle Rico thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Hey, thanks for being a good sport about that. But it's like I was on the fence about asking it, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to ask it. But then I was like, let me ask it. It's just kind of like the icebreaker. But okay, back to questions too. Rob Surratt.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I reached out to Rob, and one of the questions he wanted me to ask you is why you chose Crossmen over 2-7, Bayonne, Cadets, and I want to even say he even said North Star. I want to say North Star was one of them. Why the Crossmen?
Well, when I was in the avant-garde, and it was a great group of people up there in Saratoga. It was pretty much a local group, and they were the tightest bunch of people, and I had the greatest experience. But for me, I just really wanted to play in the big time, like the top level course. And when I was thinking about doing that, the Bridgemen were definitely a consideration, the Crossmen, and it came down to, I saw the Crossmen in '78 a couple times at some shows. And there was just something about the intensity of the Crossmen that just I identified with immediately. I don't know if it was the capes at the time or whatever it was, but I just loved it, the whole act. And so I said, you know what, I want to be in the Crossmen, and that was it.
Yeah, I want to say those late '70s Crossmen lines, there were some legendary, not just percussion people, but overall drum corps people that were in those corps, and that's awesome to hear that. That mystique just is what drew you to the Crossmen.
What was it like? Go ahead, Mark.
No, it's just there was something about it that it immediately grabbed me, and I said, I want to join the Crossmen.
What was it like going from wanting to join the Crossmen to actually showing up and auditioning? What was that experience like?
Well, let me tell you, my first Friday night rehearsal, I showed up, and I was probably, like, we had a 5-hour drive from upstate New York, and by the time I got there, they were already starting, and there was 50 snare drummers with drums on, and I didn't know how to handle that because everything I've been involved with, there was 20 people in the drum line total the whole time, and we were doing techniques, so for an entire day you didn't even know where you stood because there were so many players, and there was kids from all over the country, and it was very, very intimidating. And I remember my mom and Dad were down there with me, and of course, Big Robbie, who was the director, was talking to them. And probably about a month into the audition process, I still didn't know where I stood with this. And he had said to my mom, he goes, "Oh, don't worry, he's in the top 3. He's no problem making the 10." But yeah, it was a scary thing to play because there were so many great players.
Yeah. Who were the instructors of the line back then? Was Hannum there already? Because I know he'd marched there, correct?
Yep. Thom, Hannum, and Chris Thompson had just aged out, and they took over the drum line from Billy Kaufman and Eric Landis. Those guys had just kind of stepped down, and to help those guys, they brought in oh boy, one of our guys from the West Coast. He was in Vanguard. It's killing me. I'll figure it out. But Steve Corsi.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Steve came in and he was doing technique with us, and so Thom and Chris were the main guys. So that was great, and we're coming right out of teaching, or right out of the line. These guys were teaching.
Okay. Now I know one thing in the '90s when I marched, you would look at the Crossmen and the Crossmen drumline, and those guys looked tough. Was that kind of the was it kind of the same there when you got there to in the late '70s? Were those guys like? I mean, you look at pictures of the people that marched in the '70s, '80s, and everybody looks about 30 years old. Did they have the look back then? When you at least in your mind, you know?
Yeah, everybody had really long hair, and everybody looked like they were really old, and it was intimidating. It was very East Coast, in your face kind of a thing, and it wasn't that much of an adjustment for me. But after a year in the Corps, then you're one of the guys. But it was pretty intense.
So you march '79, you go to '80, and then the Corps. I mean, I watched that show the other day. And you talk about the Muchachos, and you guys play Pictures of Spain was the opener, correct? And that's the Muchachos chart.
Yeah, it was an original. It was original that Larry Kirshner had written for them. And we had just come out of a year in '79 where everybody did variety shows back then. And, the Corps competitively wasn't successful, but it was very good in '79. But we just didn't have an identity. So the whole thing was we need to come up with some sort of identity. So even though we were still going to do a variety show in '80, it was, let's do something that has a little energy to it. So, Larry brought that, and then, we did play that.
Yeah, what's the story behind Superman at the end? I know you guys played the planet Krypton, but you guys actually had Superman out there. Is there a story behind that, or was that just thrown in there?
Well, actually, it was funny because they really wanted to try to figure a way to have a paper mache dummy that they could fly out of the stadium. That was the whole idea, but But if we had done it, it probably would have crashed into the audience or something. It probably wouldn't have went over all that well. But the whole idea was we had this guy in the horn line who looked a lot like the actor. So they put him in a suit and opened it up, and from far away you would swear that was Christopher Reeve. So I kind of went with it. It was kind of a little extra thing at the end of the show.
Yeah, and so we go from '80 to '81, and speaking with Rob, there was another question he wanted to ask. Actually, a couple from '81. It was '81 was the first year of indoor show. DCI finals was held at the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, Canada, and he wanted to know or to see if you could talk about the extensive preparation for championship week. And he's got extensive in like quotes. I don't know that maybe that makes some sense to you.
Well, I don't know if we prepared for being inside as much as I think people think. We stayed at McGill University in Montreal. That's where we rehearsed, and they had a great big dome. It wasn't really a dome, but it was like an overhang that went over the audience and right up to the front of the sideline to kind of give us that reverb that we were going to get off the stands, which was awesome to practice in. To sit up there and watch the Corps, it's what it's like to watch a drum corps and then all of a sudden have a big scoop behind you. But we did that. But on the field, I don't remember anything different at finals than we were outside at prelims, because I don't know. We just didn't really notice it. I think the people in the audience noticed it, but we never really noticed it.
Yeah. Another thing he had mentioned, I want to say it was about '81, was I guess something about them pulling one of the snares out and dressing them up like Rocky and recreating the steps. And how did that go over? He said, just ask him how that went over with the drumline.
It didn't go over. We had a guy, again, who looked a lot like, Sylvester Stallone. He was 21 years old, and he was playing in his dream drum line. And when they approached him about it, you know, we were all about drums at that time. We didn't want anybody interfering with the drum line. So, of course, we did a little revolt, and we put our foot down and made a big stink out of it. And luckily, we won that one.
I think at one time or another, every drum line goes through some type of revolt against something that they don't like in the show. Is that fair to say, George? Would you say?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, and then so then the 81 and then 82. Rob wanted me to talk. He said, the 82 Crossmen drum line is an epic drum line because of their consistency and cleanliness and groove throughout the season. He says you guys were pretty much clean in June. However, the exposure to air or degree of difficulty, the numbers stagnated as the season progressed because you guys had nowhere to go because maybe you guys started off too clean. And he says you guys pretty much beat everybody at the beginning of the season, but then by the end, everybody caught up to you. But you guys still finished pretty high with finishing second in execution, behind the champs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because in 81 is when Thom Hannum introduced the whole height system to all of us. And he defined every little thing. In fact, I can still play the 81 opener because of the way we learned it. We just learned everything. It was very meticulous in how we approached it. We played it at like a third of the speed most of the time to get it down. We played Louis Bellson's Explosion, which, was tons of notes. And we really figured out how to play the height system and really kind of maxed it out. And then in 82, we had just about all the players back. We only lost a couple of players, and then Robbie Robinson, who was with us all those years, but in 81 he was out in the Blue Devils. So his age out year was 82, and he came back to age out with the Crossmen. So we had monster players. So we had maybe 8 players that had played together, and at auditions we had 50 kids come out, and there was only 2 spots. And I remember when we learned the opener, and we had learned it, and I think when we played it at Ensemble that day, I think it was together. I don't, we had the technical stuff down, and the line was super clean. And to answer the question about competitively over the course of the season, I think one of the problems is we made it really look easy. Yeah, so we in an 82, we just kind of made everything look super easy. And what happened is towards the end of the year, I think that people looked at that as being easy to do, and that the music was easy. And there was really nothing easy about it. And at the time, if you go back and listen to it now, and it's hard for me to go back and listen to early 80s drum corps just from what they're doing now. It's just really, really hard. But when I go back, I can listen to that drum line play and say, wow, musically, that was really ahead of its time because of the sound production and because of the musicianship that was going on. And then just clarity and consistency was really there. And, I think that a lot of other instructors kept looking at that and kept saying that what we're doing was super easy. And of course, that is the way it is sometimes. It's the way the game is played.
Was Fred Sanford out there with you guys during any of that time?
Yeah, Freddie came out in 82, and he was a consultant for us. He actually wrote the drum solo for us, the whole Shoshana thing that we played. And it was great to have him around. And, anybody who knows Fred knows that he's the greatest ever. And that he was able to teach us some things that we really needed. We needed to be a little less mechanical and have a lot more feel. And he would just, stand in front of us and say, hey guys, you really need to loosen up. And so, we would start to loosen up, and we started to then feel good about the way we played. And he added a lot to our DNA.
Now, one thing Rob had said about Fred Sanford, and you brought up Shoshana, was if you could talk about how he said letter, and Rob's got this memory about drumming that's like, it's crazy, the elephant memory of percussion. But he wanted to, if you could talk about how letter C and Shoshana related to Fred Sanford's flammables.
Yeah, well, when Fred taught us flammables early in the year, and then we learned letter C in Shoshana. It was just a big melody, and it was a trade-off between tenors and bass drums. And we just played these flam exercises, but they were all, it was kind of a compound variation on flammables. So yeah, it was great. We loved it. We loved the way it felt, and I think the people that watched the drum line felt the same way. Everybody seemed to be grooving during that, and it was great for the audience, and it was great for us. We loved playing it every day.
Yeah. In 82 was your age out, correct?
That was, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man, what a good year to age out.
Yeah. Were you in a leadership role at that time, or I mean, that was your 4th year in the group, right?
Yeah, I was. In fact, it was kind of funny because Thom and Chris would often just get to the end of songs, like they'd get to the end of pieces, and they would just take the music and just kind of shove it over here. And anytime there was those extended single patterns, they'd say, "Hey, we needed one of those extended single patterns." So I'd write it out, and it's just one of those things. I did that in 81 and in 82, and so they trusted me with the pencil, which was probably not the smartest thing in the world, but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, yeah. And you said Robbie Robinson had come back from Blue Devils that year too, correct?
Yes.
Was there like friendly competition between you guys, like drumming wise? Because he's a legendary figure himself, you know, when it comes to playing snare.
Yeah, Robbie is a great snare drummer, and we were the best of friends. I lived at his house. We would get up in the morning at 21 years old and play check patterns at 1.5 inches and see how perfect we could play them. And the friendly competition was to push each other. And we did that. We would do the individuals throughout the winter. We'd go up to Boston and compete up there, and we go back and forth with who's on top, and then out to DCI for individuals out there, which was a whole bunch of fun.
Yeah, and I'm sure individual DCI INE back then looked a lot different than what it is now. It seemed like there was a lot of people that would participate, and even spectators would go back then.
Yeah, well, the great part about it was that it was on finals morning, and no one had practice because everything came to an end at prelims, and then everything shut down, and all the corps showed up at individuals. The only thing bad was you could only have 2 people in each category. So we had several snare drummers that wanted to go, but it was going to be me and Robbie were the guys that were going to go, and the guys we competed against were insane players. It was just to watch a field of 20 snare drummers back then was crazy. I mean, the kids nowadays are off the hook great, but there's just not as many of them because the corps, they just don't allow them to go because it's on a Wednesday and they're rehearsing, and some corps are like, look, you're here for the drum corps, you can't do anything individual, that kind of thing. It's a shame because there's so much talent in the activity that to not see it is crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
And for a lot of kids who are in like lower profile groups, that's a real moment for them to shine, in the INE experience. But we get it. Corps are actually they're trying to do those final tweaks and really get everything dialed in. And like when we marched, a lot more corps were involved, and for a lot of groups that ended up just being kind of like a throwaway day, where it's like half the corps is gone. So what are we going to work on? Like right before prelims. You, Mark, you actually marched with Jim Dwyer. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, very well known WGI visual judge, and did you guys march together all 4 years, all the same years that you were there?
Yes. Actually, he came in 1980.
Okay.
So 80, 81, and 82, and I believe a couple of those years we stood right next to each other. So I know Jim better than just about anybody, but he's the best.
One last thing from Rob, and that was he says when you guys were in the line, he always saw Chris Thompson as the Wild West, free-spirited, write a ton of notes as you're racing down the 50-yard line at 400 miles an hour instructor. And, he saw Thom Hannum as the sensible, even-keeled, play just enough to get credit, but not too much to get in trouble on the sheets. the rev limiter on Chris's supercharged V12 engine. He said neither was bad, just different approaches. If you can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, Thom and Chris were a great team because of that, because you could have a phrase of music that all of a sudden is super insane with notes, and then the next one makes perfect sense with incredible phrasing, because they just had a different approach to things. I mean, when Thom left the Crossmen after 1982 and went up to Garfield at the time, you could see the approach. All of a sudden, he had to redo an entire percussion program, and he just said, okay, if this is going to be mine from the ground up, this is the way it's going to be. And then I aged out, and I was writing with Chris in 1983, and that was just, it's two guys that just can't stop and can't help themselves, and we just wrote a billion notes, and then we had to clean it all, which was the hard part. But they were two different personalities. Yeah, Chris was very much a energy guy, wrote some great stuff, and with a lot of notes. And Tom's was a totally different approach, great stuff, but it's just different. And both excellent. And it was great to have both of those guys be mentors of mine, because I lived with them. When I moved in with the Corps, 17 years old, and boom, I moved in and I stayed in an apartment with Thom and Chris. So I got a chance to kind of watch that whole thing develop for a few years.
Yeah, that seems like a great team to learn from, for sure, if you wanted to be an instructor during that time.
Yeah, they're great guys. In fact, the last 2 years, 19 and 18, I went out and spent a few days with Crown to do some consulting with Thom. So, and he says, hey, he'd love to have the indoor influence and things for me to take a look at, the Crown drum line, and the stuff that they've done has been incredible. And so it's like nothing ever changed, and time did not go by. All of a sudden, after all these years, we just get back together and bang. So it's they're great influence and great instructors, writers.
You had basically grown up in the activity. I mean, at the point where you aged out, you had spent more than half your life doing it. That being said, did you know it was something you wanted to keep doing? Was that just a given? Or was there any kind of like, maybe I should, go off and, go to school, get a job, like actually like, or was drum corps always the thing? And when did you know that?
Drum corps was always the thing. And, my parents weren't in it. We talked earlier how I got involved, but it was a hitch that just happened for me, and I never let go. It's so insane and so addicting, and I just wanted more and more and more. I loved it. And that way, after I aged out, I wanted to keep teaching and go from there. So, and I found a way to do school and everything else while I was doing drum corps, but I just wanted to keep doing it.
Yeah, you talk about teaching after you age out. So the 1983 Crossmen Corps and Drumline, I guess I've seen a lot in the threads about how, I don't know if thick is the right word, but how many notes were in that book. And it was a free for all of notes, and the black page of notes. And was it letter X is like famously spoken about? Can you talk a little bit about that book in particular?
Yeah, never sit down with two notey people who aren't going to stop each other and decide you're going to pass the pad around, because that's what we did. And Chris and I just tried to outdo each other, which is not the smartest thing to do, but the players loved it, because when they started, the first ensemble rehearsal we did playing Ruslan and Ludmilla, you should have seen the brass guys' face. They were ready to kill us, because it was just loaded with notes. It was insane. And it never ended. It just kept going and kept going and kept going. And then we got to this Rodrigo thing that we played, where we had this extension. We called it letter X. And Chris said to me, go upstairs and I want you to write what would be an individual solo, like what you would do in your individual solo. So I went upstairs and I did this whole thing with a cello rondo in it. And it was just way insane. I came downstairs laughing, saying, okay, how about this? And I played it. He goes, perfect. And I'm thinking, no, we can't really play this. And we tried to play it. And it was it was nuts. And the players, luckily for us, the players were great, and they could grab onto it. But yeah, we had so many notes. We had comments like, "You guys need to put this thing in the next county when you perform." And we had a guy tell us he was OD'd over notes when we got to the end of this one thing. It was just so much going. These are judges, and
those are the tapes. Those are the tapes you want to hear.
it wasn't real smart. But the players and the people that would come to rehearsals and watch, and it was insane. The problem is it was just so much that it was it was in your face so much that
it probably wasn't musical in the direction that drum corps was headed in the time.
We missed the mark on it, but it was a lot of fun.